Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only. Then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
This is the Long Island Report on 107.1 WLIR. Using common sense, talking Long Island issues. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia.
Good afternoon. This is the Long Island Report. I am Judge Richard Weinberg. With me is my good friend and esteemed colleague, Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. Jesse is the Vice Chair of the State Republican Party and the County Chair of the Suffolk Party. With us today is Paul Zuber, the Executive Vice President of the Business Council of New York State, a very important trade association that deals with the issues that face the business community and why you need to have informed, intelligent people making legislative decisions that impact the business community and what that means to the state. Paul, Jesse and I are delighted and honored to have you on the show today. Welcome to the Long Island Report.
Well, thank you, Judge, and thank you for you guys having me today to talk about all the things that we're doing at the Business Council. As you said, we are the largest business association in New York State. We represent over 3,500 members. We represent some of the largest companies in the world to some of the smallest businesses that are part of New York's economic system. So we run the gamut. And so the beautiful thing about the Business Council in my position is I get to see it from all different ends of the spectrum, from how it impacts small businesses to how it impacts large businesses, medium-sized businesses, minority and women-owned businesses, you name it. We can see it and we understand the issues that businesses are facing, particularly here in New York State, when we talk about the issues regarding affordability and the issues that are currently being discussed in Albany about the budget.
Well, speaking about the budget, Paul, as we're doing this show, there's still no deal on the budget. Under the state constitution, they're supposed to have a budget by April 1st, as all three of us know. The answer is that's going to be delayed. People got used to having on-time budgets with Andrew Cuomo when Cuomo was New York State's governor. You don't have that now. You have an emboldened state legislature, which is, in my opinion, I'm not speaking for the council or for Jesse, but in my opinion, which is being driven by the far left radical fringe of the Democratic Party, which seems to me to have a hostility to business in general without understanding the contributions that the business community makes to the people and to the state of New York. Would you give me your views on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're correct. At the time that we're talking right now, there is no budget. I'm looking outside my window. There's no white smoke coming out of the Capitol at this point in time. So we still don't have a budget, and there are a number of issues that you're discussing. But to your point about some of the difficulties that businesses are having with the current makeup of the legislature, I'll give you one, prime example that just recently got knocked out of the budget process. As we know, back in 2019, under Governor Cuomo, we passed the historic Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which is our new environmental act. And under that law, the design was we would reduce greenhouse gas emissions to 40% below 1990 levels by 2030, and we would move that to 85% below 1990 levels at 2050. So great, wonderful. I think everybody agrees that, some things need to be done to protect our environment. But one thing that never really was looked at was the cost. What was going to be the cost to business and what was going to be cost to consumers? So part of this legislation the progressives touted a metric in which you use to determine the amount of greenhouse gas emissions. And without getting too in the weeds with the audience, it's a 20-year accounting metric. Well, every state in the United States, the federal government, and internationally, they use a 100-year metric. Now, why is that? Why is this a problem? Well, the governor's office just came out with a report that said, based on this 20-year accounting metric, there is a possibility that consumers can see gas prices rising by 62% per gallon and home heating costs rising by 80%. Yet, when the governor tried to put this on the table to fix it, environmentalist progressives, they came out in force. They screamed in front of the governor's office. They riled up a certain amount of legislators. So the governor actually, just before the recording of this, came out and announced that they were going to have to do what they could first with some changes to the law, but they were unable to do the change in the accounting metric at this point in time. But here we are with everybody in Albany screaming about affordability. We have to fix affordability. But how do we tell the public and our businesses, oh, by the way, we passed this law. We know we need to get it fixed. It's going to cost you 62 cents more per gallon. It's going to cost you 80% more in your home heating bill, but we're not going to do anything about it. Why? I really don't know, because it's not stopping the bill. We're still heading towards a cleaner energy mechanism here in New York. It's insane is what is the only word I can come up with.
Well, to our audience, we're talking to Paul Zuber, who's the executive vice president of the Building Council of New York State. We're talking about impossible legislative mandates that are imposed by a runaway legislature that doesn't look at economic costs. Also on our call is my good friend Jesse Garcia, the vice chair of the state Republican Party and the county chair. I'm going to turn this over to Jesse in a moment. I just want to make the following comment, Paul. Literally, before we went on air, not 15 minutes ago, I happened to read James Hanley's piece from the Empire Center raising the issues that you've been commenting on. And fundamentally, in my view, you have legislators passing laws. They do not understand the economic impacts to the business community, which is then passed on to consumers, and the livability in the state of New York, and the affordability. And we have a real crisis here. And your point about the governor backing off on this is a very bad sign, because indeed we are the only state that has this 20-year clock as opposed to the 100-year clock. Jesse, your turn.
Thank you, Paul. It's a pleasure to have you here, and thank you so much for joining us and for that insight. Well, what I wanted to ask you is what you've actually two questions and such. First, why do you suspect? I mean, is it just pure politics? Is it neglect? Is it incompetence? Is it just for the drive of the political win that it seems that these laws that come forward do not have, as you said, a look towards the end user and the impact on the end user? In this case, as you pointed out, the increase in home heating oil, the whole increase in gas prices, that there never seem to be taken into account, or that the impacts of small business and an impact of these legislations there. Where do you see the divide there? Is it just pure politics, or where what are we missing as voters?
I think it's a little bit of both, Jesse. I think on one level, I always look at it this way. I have my progressive friends, I have my friends to the right, I have my friends to the middle. I think we all agree on one basic fundamental thing. We want a diverse, inclusive, and strong economy. I think we all agree on that. That's one thing we totally can agree on. I think the problem with some is some of the legislators don't really understand business. And I don't mean to say this as if they're unintelligent, but I just don't think they sometimes understand how business functions, right? So sometimes they'll do things in one of two manners that hurt business. Either they'll add cost to business, not realizing that what businesses are going to have to do is pass it on to the consumer. They're either going to have to pass it on to the consumer, or they're going to have to change the makeup of their employees at their business, because obviously we know salary is probably the highest cost for a business. So sometimes they don't understand that. So when they do something like propose a $21.25 minimum wage, they don't understand what's going to happen at the end of this, the end user, right? So if I'm a small business and I suddenly have to pay my employees $21.25, you know, my choices are limited. Either I'm cutting back on my staff, I'm passing the cost on to consumers. The one thing I can't do is I can't take the hit, because I'm just like everybody else. I'm trying to make my mortgage, I'm trying to pay my car note, so on and so forth. So I do think there's a lack of understanding as to how the business world works. And then, you know, secondly, I do believe, unfortunately, and not all, again, there's a lot of good members even, and I don't want to make it bad about progressives, but there are some members who, to me, it's almost like a game, for lack of a better term. It's almost like, well, this is who I'm supposed to be, so I'm going to be it whether or not it helps the community or it doesn't help the community. And that kind of gets to me, and I think that's where Albany has gotten a little lost, is it's somewhat disingenuous to me. You know, if we all want affordability, so why aren't we working together towards affordability?
Well, there's another.
That's
Go ahead, Ashley.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just don't, you know, one of the things that is amazing is I don't understand how they want to speak about affordability when they see that their taxing is one of the highest, if not the highest, in the state of New York. But, you know, I can understand and appreciate the challenges you have. I mean, just looking through your background, you've represented both labor groups and big businesses, MGM and resorts, to New York State laborers and New York's firefighters. But you also worked with important caucuses that have a loud voice: the Black Caucus, the Latino Caucus, the Asian Caucus, just to name a few. You know, sometimes the members of these caucuses have a more progressive slant to them. I'm interested to figure out. Maybe you can even help me in how I can navigate my own business. How do you get this group of, you know, people that maybe sit more a little bit to the left and more against capitalism to understand the benefits of a capitalistic society and the importance of business, and not grounding business to a pulp where the economy doesn't grow?
Yeah, it's hard. I think you have to remind them. You know, it is, but I think you have to remind them that at the end of the day, all the things that everybody wants in New York in particular doesn't happen unless you have, you know, a strong job market with people being employed and people finding work that is meaningful, that can help change the lives of their families. So I think a lot of it too is on us as the business council to help educate some of the members. So when you look at, you know, minimum wage, for example, you know, when I'm talking to members of the Black, Puerto Rican, Hispanic, and Asian caucus, you know, sometimes I remind them that, you know, hey guys, you know, understand, outside of a few minority and women-owned businesses, most of those businesses are simply small businesses that happen to be owned by a minority or woman. So when you do things like, you know, raise the minimum wage, it has a dramatic impact on those people who you're trying to help, who traditionally hire from the communities that you want to help, right? So I think there's a little bit of, you know, education on their part, and sometimes, you know, they get it. And, you know, I recently had a conversation with a member too, that, you know, sometimes another thing that we're teaching members, or not teaching them, but trying to get put forth to them, is when you do a piece of legislation where you decide, boy, I'm going to go get that, you know, big company, whether it be a Walmart or whoever it is, also understand when you pass that legislation, 9 times out of 10, the small business is impacted by it, because whatever regulation you're putting on them, you're putting a similar type of regulation on the small business. And you have to understand, small businesses don't have human resource departments. They're just trying to get by. They can't figure out half of these mandates that the state puts on them. So It's tough, but I think, that's where we start with our discussions with a lot of the members, because at the end of the day, it's about, getting people jobs and getting New York working and moving the economy forward.
We're going to have to take a break in a moment, Paul, but I just want to get your view, and I mean your macro view on this whole situation we face in New York. I look at California, and I see California is in the process of becoming a lost state. I look at Illinois, and I see it already is a lost state. They don't balance the revenues coming in with the costs going out and their obligations for entitlement programs or pension obligations, union contracts. They just don't seem to be getting it. They're losing population, and the population they're losing are the most productive people who provide the jobs, the services, the revenues, and they're going to run out of money. Are you optimistic that we can get a turnaround in the state of New York, or are we just headed in a bad direction that's irreversible?
Well, first of all, I'm an optimist, so I'm always optimistic that we can get a turnaround. I think a lot of that is dependent on our leadership, right? It's dependent on Governor Hochul taking control in her position as governor. It's incumbent upon, Carl Hastie in his position as speaker, and Andrea Stewart-Cousins as her position as majority leader, and then the minority leaders, Will Barkley and Bob Ortt, being able to continue to, hoist the flag for business and others. So I'm optimistic. I think what makes me nervous is I think sometimes our legislators focus on the wrong thing to fix affordability. And I think they come up with all these unique and interesting ideas, but they don't really get at affordability. And I can go into more detail about, some of the things that we see as fundamental to fixing affordability. That would be a simple change. It'd be a dramatic change, but it'd be a simple change to help New York State. But
could you stay on for our second segment? Because I wanted.
Yes.
Jesse will keep Paul Zuber on, the executive vice president of the Building Council of New York State, to keep our conversation flowing on this, because I think it's a very important issue. Because if we can resolve the economics of New York State and get the legislature in line, common sense proposals, I think the state is in trouble. So I want to get more thoughts from Paul Zuber. This is the Long Island Report with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. Our guest is the very learned and experienced Paul Zuber, the Executive Vice President of the Business Council. We'll be taking a break on the Long Island Report. We'll be back in a moment. Stay tuned for more interesting conversation.
Your snacking routine can get a little dull. Time for a light and fit remix. Like a crunchy storm of graham cookies, caramel pearls, and dark chocolate, showering down into a smooth, creamy yogurt. Enjoy 3 light and fit remix varieties with craveable flavors and up to 120 calories and 10 grams of protein per 4.5-ounce serving. See remixyogurt.com.
It's the Long Island Report, using common sense, talking Long Island issues. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia on 107.1 WLIR.
This is the Long Island Report. We're back. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. With me is my co-host, my good friend, esteemed colleague Jesse Garcia, the Vice Chair of the State Republican Party and the County Chair of the Suffolk Republican Party. And Jesse and I are very honored and privileged indeed to have a great guest, very informed, learned observer of the legislative process and the business practices that can make or break a state, and that's the crisis we're in New York. Will New York State survive, given the drive by the left-wing radical Democrats to ignore the economic realities of the system that we live in? Paul, I want to direct your attention to 2 issues that trouble me. One is a bill up there. Another, you see, the wonderful thing about some of the radical left is they're very good in creating a narrative or a title for something. It's almost Orwellian the way they do that. So, for example, they call it the Good Cause Eviction Bill. Now, my point of view about the Good Cause Eviction Bill is you're hampering property rights, which is a constitutional right. People who own property should be able to, as long as they're not discriminating on a civil rights level, be able to decide who their tenants are or not. And you can't use this Good Cause Eviction Bill as a hidden device to create rent controls throughout the state of New York, because in my opinion, once you have rent controls in established places, you subvert the workings of the market and you have less housing rather than more housing. So if you're concerned about getting more affordable housing for folks, you better not impose a mandatory rent control law in the state of New York. What say you, Paul?
I totally agree with you. So, I think before we hit the commercial break, I think one of the things that I was talking about was the fact that, sometimes, in my opinion, the legislature focuses on the wrong thing when they're talking about affordability. So good cause eviction, the merit behind it was always, well, we don't want homelessness, right? We don't want people to be thrown out on the streets. We don't want homelessness because there is an increase in homelessness. That's fine, but there's ways to deal with that without creating a system that stymies, the incentive for landlords to improve property or people to build more affordable housing. Because the one thing that good cause eviction doesn't do, it doesn't create more affordable housing. So when it's put into the affordable housing debate, it's a misnomer. It's disingenuous, right? It's really not about affordable housing. It's really about homelessness and keeping people in their apartments. You can do the same thing with voucher assistance programs that are currently offered, as well as improving those voucher assistance programs. I think every major developer is supportive of the voucher programs. I think those are the type of things that combat the concerns that people have with good cause eviction. But good cause eviction does not create more affordable housing. Let's be clear about that. And I think that's the problem. It's somehow been swooped up into this argument about affordable housing when it's really not about affordable housing. So to my point earlier, I think we sometimes get lost in what is going to help New York State. Right now, we have 450,000 open jobs in New York State. There's about 400,000 unemployed people in New York State. It would seem that with 400,000 unemployed people and 450,000 job openings, everybody would have a job. But there's a major problem with childcare. So why aren't we sitting down, figuring out how to fix childcare? Let's stop spending our money on a lot of junk, and let's spend our money on childcare. You guys are in Long Island. I'm sure Long Island is similar to the comments that I get from my members in Westchester. In Westchester, childcare costs about $25,000 a child. So now you're instantly taking people out of the marketplace. You're instantly taking them out of the job market because families have to decide, honey, either you're working or I'm working, but one of us needs to stay with the kid because childcare is too expensive. Those are the type of things that could be fixed and could make a significant difference in our economy, would make New York more affordable. Good cause eviction doesn't do that. It doesn't create more affordable housing. Universal child care, which should be a general fund expense, it should be treated just like education, would have a dramatic impact on the New York State economy. Dramatic.
Jesse, your comments.
Yeah, Paul, as you see this, and it's my understanding, and I believe I'm right here, that this is the third budget that is now late in the last recent years. Where do you see is the major blockage between the legislature and Governor Hochul? People are saying it could be her inexperience or she's being rolled. Others say it's other reasons. But if there was one issue that you in what you've been dealing with that you've noticed and seen, maybe it doesn't even have to do with the building council, that is holding up this process for the rest of New Yorkers.
Without a doubt, is bail. Bail reform. Obviously, the governor has asked for some fairly significant changes to the current bail laws. There's obviously been a strong pushback from the legislature in regards to those changes. As we speak now, I'm told that they're likely to inch towards some sort of agreement on bail, but that is probably the single most contentious issue. And we all deal in the world of politics as well, and politically for the governor and others, finding some way to make changes to bail is incredibly important. So I think the governor has been very adamant about her position on bail. I think a couple of days ago, Speaker Hastie said that very little had been discussed in the budget other than bail, and that bail had taken up 90% of the oxygen in the room. So that's the issue that is holding us up right now, is the issue surrounding bail.
I would note to you, gentlemen, that before we started the show, I happened to read another article, because I'm constantly reading throughout the day, that DC 37 has come out against any changes to the so-called bail reform law. And they're, a union pool of 250,000 members?
Yeah, a union about 250,000 members. And, look, I understand it's a highly emotional issue. But the perception is the perception. And I think that has to be taken into account when folks are negotiating it, because whether this data shows one thing or another thing, the perception by the general public is that there are issues out there. So I think that's part of what's kind of complicating the discussion, because there is an argument that the data is showing one thing, but the public's feeling something else. So I think they have to kind of navigate those two issues. But I'm told that they're getting closer, so we might get white smoke coming out of the Capitol sooner than we think.
Okay. The last issue I want to raise with you is there's a New York State law on price gouging. Now, my take on the law, it's overbroad, it's vague, and the problem is that you have a state attorney general and her staff who really don't understand how the economy works, global market conditions. So, for example, on fossil fuels, the people who are the wholesalers and the retailers in the business of providing fossil fuels, which is absolutely essential to have a strong economy, because you can't do it on wind and solar alone, and you haven't opted to do nuclear yet. So if you don't understand the market and how prices are made, and then just because you see the price going up at the pump, you're saying, oh, the gasoline retailer or the wholesaler is gouging the public and taking advantage of them. The problem with that is that they're really not. When the Saudis cut a deal with the Iranians and they decided to stop providing, was I think 1.6 or 1.7 million gallons a day themselves for production, that will have a global impact on price. And then when they have the leadership of about 6 or 7 other nation states that produce oil, that will have an impact. So what do you want from the local retailer or the local wholesaler who's merely responding to these market forces that are beyond their control? What say you, Paul?
Well, I think this is a perfect example of kind of our place, in New York, and why we're so important to kind of try to give a voice to business. And I also think it's another example of why, businesses need to pay attention and be active. So going back to your initial point, New York has always had a price gouging statute. There was always, when there was an abnormal disruption in the market and someone was charging unconscionable price. Unconscionable, yeah.
I learned that first year law school. Okay.
Excessive price. It was considered, price gouging, but it was a very loose statute, and it was, I think don't quote me on this, but I think the last iteration was about 1998 when it came about, and it was kind of loose for a reason, right? Because supply chains and markets are difficult to kind of try to define in a statute, and really what the legislature was going after was, hey, when there's a hurricane and Long Island gets hit by a hurricane, you don't want some person who owns a hardware store charging people $5,000 for a generator, right? That's what they were trying to get at. And then when COVID hit, we saw people taking advantage of medical supplies. So the legislature amended the bill to include medical supplies, but then also gave the Attorney General the ability to do rules and regs in relation to price gouging. And to your point, that's where some of the concern comes in, because the Attorney General has put out her initial rules in terms of price gouging. And to your point, I think there is, in my opinion, some concerns with some of the definitions that she put around things, and some of the concerns that markets, the true nature of markets, is not taken into account when looking at price gouging. Now, to the Attorney General's credit, she did reach out to the Business Council. We did have a meeting with Attorney General Tish James. She went with myself and Heather Mulligan, who is our CEO and president, as well as the New York City Partnership and Kathy Wild. We've had subsequent conversations with them, and we actually brought some of our members to talk about the issues surrounding prices with her staff as they were drafting these. And subsequent to them issuing these rules, they also reached out to us to notify us that, hey, these are not final. We still want your input. There's a comment period that ends May 22nd that you can place comments, give comments to the Attorney General's office. So as an organization, we are actually having a meeting with our members on April 12th, where we're going to sit down with everybody and get an understanding of where their concerns are in this, and obviously put our comments, as well as suggesting our members put in their comments. But to your point, Judge, as presently written, the comments that we have gotten back from many of our businesses is a lot of concern that the marketplace and how the marketplace actually operates is not included enough in the determinations that would allow the AG to determine if someone is price gouging. And sometimes not understanding that market could potentially lead to somebody being accused of something that they're not doing. So that's a major concern. And I'll just say this one last point. I think the difficulty of these rules is it's hard to understand a market, because I know I had this conversation with the Attorney General's office, because they had asked, hey, can your members give us a map of their supply chain? But businesses will not give you their supply chain. That's proprietary information. So without understanding a particular industry's supply chain, it sometimes becomes hard to craft a language that would properly take into account all the intricacies of that supply chain and marketplace. So, to your point, I think we've gotten a lot of feedback from our members. There's a lot of concern. It's yet to be seen if the Attorney General is going to be willing to make changes to the rules. But we're gonna put our heads together with our members. We're gonna put our comments in, and we're going to fight as an association to make sure that however this comes out, it's in the best. It's best for business.
Well, Paul, on behalf of Chairman Garcia and myself, I want to thank you very much for being on this week's show. That's been very instructive. It's been very educational. I hope our listeners enjoyed it as much as Jesse and I have. We'd love to have you back in the future. We're going to take a break now and go into our third segment. Jesse, when we come back, something very interesting just happened in the city of New York and I want you to take the lead on what that is. That's to do with somebody named Donald Trump and the District Attorney's Office of New York County. So, Paul, thank you very much for being.
Well, I'm glad I'm leaving this conversation. You guys go right ahead.
Paul, thanks again for being with us. This is the Long Island Report with Chairman Jesse Garcia. I want to thank Paul Zuber, Executive Vice President of Business Council of New York, for being on for our first two segments. Very helpful indeed. We'll be right back, and we're going to be talking about the indictment in a 34-count indictment of Donald Trump, the former President of the United States, for the New York County District Attorney. Stay tuned for more interesting conversation.
Campfire season's back, and that means s'mores. But when you're at home treating yourself, take them over ice with Dunkin' S'mores Cold Brew Concentrate. And suddenly you're always treating yourself. The home with Dunkin' is where you want to be. Click or tap the banner to shop now.
It's the Long Island Report, using common sense, talking Long Island issues. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia on 107.1 WLIR.
This is the Long Island Report. We're back. This is Judge Richard Weinberg. With me is Jesse Garcia, the Vice Chair of the State Republican Party and County Chair of the Suffolk Republican Party. We just had two very interesting segments with Paul Zuber, the Executive Vice President of the Business Council, talking about the impact on the future of New York State with a troubling legislative process and legislative initiatives by, it seems to me, in my humble opinion, by legislators who do not understand how markets work, how business works, and the impact on ultimate consumers. But we're going to move off of that, and we're going to talk about something else. And that something else, Jesse, is what?
Well, we got a little bit of a head fake last week when we were recording this, because we were told that the secret panel that was reviewing indictment report, was weighing an indictment of former President Donald Trump, had taken a pause, and then nothing was going to happen, only to find out on a day later that Trump was indicted on 34 charges. And this past week, that history came to our screens and came to our streets here in New York when Donald Trump, the 45th President of the United States, was brought before and arraigned in the New York County Court. First and foremost, we have all agreed that this is nothing more, at least we've speculated, this is nothing more than the weaponization of not only the District Attorney's Office in New York, but it's an overall weaponization of the Department of Justice and the justice system here in our nation. Once you hear, Trump as he goes through his litany of issues, it's tough to argue that this is not one form of justice for Donald Trump and then another form of justice for everybody else, which is weaker than everybody else. When you look at it, where it's been proven and certified that his campaign was spied on. It was, that the dossier that was promulgated, the Russia hoax, was paid for and involved both the DNC and the Clinton campaign. In fact, the Clinton campaign was fined by the FEC for their involvement in that dossier. That dossier led to Russiagate and the expense of almost $35 million in a special investigation, and it led to nothing. It led to no charges being brought. And of course, now we also heard that there were lies and misinterpretations, misrepresentations to the Lisa court that allowed for the investigation of the Trump campaign. And then we had the two impeachments that moved forward and followed. But here, Your Honor, we're looking at, and you know this better than anybody, being a former member of the bench, that this 34 counts is nothing new. There have been experts in the legal community that have said that they're trying to use misdemeanors to link on and to be linked to a crime. There is no new crime here. Legal now and analysts have agreed, and they've been it's been written that connecting the offenses to violations about the law and crimes and other crimes are going to be a challenge. And I think rightly that there's some issues that there's an attempt and a plan by the Trump legal team to try and dismiss these cases. And of course, there's some concern of some judicial bias. This is nothing more. This is nothing more than a George Soros-backed prosecutor who campaigned on indicting and arresting the former president. That was the basis of his campaign. He's had a long and healthy, legal tussle with the president over the years, dating from the time when he was in the AG's office. And what's surprising here, and you can get into more detail, indictment doesn't mean it's a slam dunk, because an indictment, when you go before that panel, only allows for the prosecutors to show what evidence or information they have. It's a one-sided type of legal tool. But this is not good for America. From my perspective, it is further dividing this nation. It is demonstrating the weaponization of an institution of government that is vital to us for to be under the rule of law. So we have confidence in the rule of law. Do we have confidence in our judicial system and our prosecutorial system? That's being vanished. And when you have both critics and allies of the president both saying that this was an overreach and there's nothing here, it's a mistake. And to think about it, let's just, I'll close with this. This was an investigation and an indictment that came after back to 2016. And when Cy Vance, the former district attorney of Manhattan, took this case on, no small fan of corruption, no small fan of Donald Trump, I'm sure. They tacked away from this case and they went on to different cases because they didn't see anything was vital here that could secure a conviction. And also the Federal Elections Commission looked at the campaign finance portion of this and also brought no charges. This is just wrong to happen in America, and it's wrong to happen here to anyone, because as I've said before, and I've said it on many different interviews, if they could do this to the president, who's next? And who's next could be the person in the mirror. It could be any one of our listeners here, that when the government is gone rogue and decides they want to convict somebody, they will trump up their charges, and they have the full weight and the buying power. They have the finances of their government and their office to outspend you in trying to reach their conviction. I don't know if they'll be able to do that with Donald Trump, but that's where we are right now.
Well, Jesse, I've been listening very carefully to your exposition on this. And honestly, I listen to radio and TV commentators all the time. I read articles about this all the time. I don't think I've read a more succinct, cogent, insightful analysis of the large problem than what you just said. And I want to thank you for that. And our listeners should thank you as well, because that's an objective rendition of the reality. Let me share the following with you. And you correctly point out, even people who are not fans of Donald Trump, whether as a personality or as our former president, have come out and criticized this. People like Attorney General Barr, who doesn't particularly like Donald Trump, served as Attorney General, and I think well, and Trump would have been well advised to listen more to Barr than to some of his other advisors. But Barr said this is absolutely ridiculous. There is no crime here. That's Barr. Andrew McCarthy, the very esteemed Assistant U.S. Attorney for Southern District of New York, most famous for prosecuting the first World Trade Center bombing case, a great legal expert, says there is no crime here. These are, forgive the expression, trumped-up charges. Alan Dershowitz, the very distinguished constitutional lawyer, constitutional law professor from Harvard, again, a Democrat who always voted against Trump, says there is nothing here. So you have people of diverse backgrounds who aren't pro-Trump apologists saying there is nothing here. I add my voice to that. There is nothing here. I've read every count of this 34-count indictment and the 16-page indictment. Let me tell you some of the defects. Number one, you have a statute of limitations defect. The only thing that's really alleged in these papers are misdemeanors. And misdemeanors have a 2-year statute of limitations. and it's way past the 2-year statute of limitations. They try to bolster it by kicking it up in generalized language to say that they're felonies because it was in furtherance of another crime or a cover-up of a crime. Okay, the answer is, but they don't tell you what these other crimes are, and that's a defect in the indictment. There is nothing in the indictment, as you read the indictment, that shows that Donald Trump, in fact, has done anything wrong that would elevate this to felonies. Now, Attorney General Barr has made very clear that if you're going to try to show some sort of violation, you have to have what the law requires, which is specific intent to commit a crime. There is no specific intent here. Let's get back to the reality, Jesse. The reality is Trump paid off a would-be extortionist a couple of weeks before the election money out of his own personal funds, not campaign finance funds, own personal funds, to preserve his marriage and the reputation of the Trump brand, which his children were going to have to be responsible for if he won the presidency in terms of running the business. There was no intent to influence an election. So there is no campaign finance law violation here, which is the heart of the matter. And all of those counts, the 34 counts, and what they're trying to say is this is a big deal. It's 34 counts, so he's got to be guilty of something. Let me tell you what this is, Jesse. It's the same old for 34 counts. It comes out of the same transaction, occurrence, and event. Every time they made a bookkeeping entry or they passed a check, that was another count. But it's the same deal. He paid her off. He got a non-disclosure agreement, which is perfectly legal and kosher, and it's over. And that's what it was. And they're trying to make a crime out of nothing. I've gotten the sign that we have to take a break. We will be back for the final segment of this week's Long Island Report. Please stay tuned for more interesting and important conversation.
We're shipping Mother's Day gifts with a rapid-fire round of questions. Ready?
Yes. My gift. Can you pack it?
Yep.
Ship it.
Yes.
Guarantee it.
Of course.
Oh, send gift baskets?
For sure.
Protect electronics? Dog-proof it? Return it if they hate it?
Yes, no, and yeah.
Are you the UPS store?
Hey, we have a winner!
Visit theupsstore.com/guarantee for full details. Most locations are independently owned. Product, services, prices, and hours of operation may vary. See Center for details. The UPS Store. Visit a store today.
It's the Long Island Report, using common sense, talking Long Island issues. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia on 107.1 WLIR.
All right, this is the Long Island Report. We're back. I'm with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. We're going to switch gears now. I want to talk about world affairs, foreign policy, national security issues. Jesse, I want to begin with China's grand plan for world dominance. Now, they have mapped out a long-term strategic plan to become the major power in the world, to break up the leadership of the international community by the United States. And this is serious business. And they've done this a whole bunch of ways. You know, they've built islands in the waterways to block commerce and control commerce. They've cut deals with Russia and Venezuela to get a supply of oil because they don't have their own self-sufficient oil supply. They've brokered a deal with Saudi Arabia and Iran, which has fostered the axis of evil that you and I have talked about. They've subverted our academic institutions and our media. They have the TikTok issue, which is a subversion of the minds of our young people and gets important intelligence information from us. They foster the culture of identity politics and wokeism on their media gambits and their academia controls and the media controls. And this is very troubling to me because I believe, and then I turn it over to you, I believe that you have an emerging new world order that puts the United States in the crosshairs. And I believe that the Biden administration has had at best, a non-existent response, and at worst, have aided and abetting this gambit by the Chinese for world dominance. What say you?
I cannot disagree with you in your characterization of how the uninvolvement of the Biden administration on the world stage has put us on the sidelines. And I agree with you that we're on the crosshairs. But I sometimes wonder if we are even on the playing field right now. One thing that has been concerning me is that it appears that the strife that has been going on, the self-inflicted wounds that the United States has been entertaining itself, maybe the Trump indictment and other matters and such, and those who antagonize internal strife within our society have taken our attention away from what our position is in the world stage. And I say that, and I say this, and I'm not joking about it, and I'm embarrassed by saying this, that I truly wonder if President Biden and his administration can multitask. I do not believe that they can, and they have not demonstrated the ability to do that. Republican administrations, whether you like them or not, Trump to Bush to Reagan to Bush 41, they had the ability, and you can argue with the results of that, but they had the ability to deal with both domestic and international crises and matters in real time. It does not seem that the Biden administration is able to do that. And as they do that, it's created a vacuum on the world stage. And as you pointed out, there's a rising force, a rising new world order, where as China rises and other partners of their axis of evil, as we've deemed them, the placement and the place of the United States has shrunk. For all that we can say, and Donald Trump was being criticized for being an isolationist and tasking NATO to actually pay up as they were chartered to do, the United States played was front step on all issues on international matters. The Abraham Accords is a perfect example of that. And we didn't have North Korea, China, Russia, portraying itself now as the new Soviet Union, moving forward through Europe and impinging upon Western Europe. This is nothing more, and it's a long-winded answer, but it's nothing more than the Biden administration basically ceding the American leadership and American world order at the table. It is ceding its seat at the table to other forces. And we need to wake up as a society, because one thing that has worried me, when you have Venezuela, you have Iran, you have China, you have Russia, you have North Korea, you have all them operating in sync in one capacity or another, whether that partnership it certainly is beneficial to some cases to each and every one of them. But they have one purpose. It's surrounding freedom-loving countries. It's for surrounding the United States. And our leaders here in America First must wake up. And I believe our European leaders need to continue to wake up and not be distracted by self-created agitators within our society.
Well, I got the ultimate sign that we have to sign off for this week. Jesse, I want to thank you for another great show. It's been fascinating being with you and with our guest, Paul Zuber. I want to thank you. I look forward to being with you again next week. I want to wish all of our listeners a wonderful Passover and a wonderful Easter. I hope you stay well. I hope you enjoy your families. God bless you and God bless America. Thank you, Jesse.
Thank you, and happy Passover and happy Easter.